I'm super excited to make this, to talk about this tonight. I hope you guys will enjoy the class. I'm planning to discuss a game that basically kind of helped Ian Nepomniachtchi qualify to the candidates tournament, and this is a game that he played against Boris Gelfand in Jerusalem in 2019. That was the last Grand Prix tournaments. If you guys remember, for the candidates, there were various ways that players could qualify, and so I decided to, okay, after having talked to Grandmaster Elshan Moradiabadi, he has suggested this, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, thank you so much, because I wanted something, you know, about Nepo, since, you know, now all the talk is about him. He is the challenger to Magnus Carlsen. We're going to see a world championship match in December in Dubai, so I think everyone is looking forward to that, and since that's what's happening, I thought it would be nice to kind of talk a little bit about him. And you know, it's never, and not always wins are the ones that make a player special, right? But you sometimes have to see the struggle and how they come back from difficult situations and things like that. And of course, he has had a lot of amazing games throughout his chess career, but I think you know, it's kind of nice to see how he came to be where he is today. And yeah, so once again, this is a game from the Grand Prix in Jerusalem, which took place in December 2019, and it was a 16-player knockout tournament. In the first round, he was paired against Boris Gelfand, and things could have gone any way since this was a knockout tournament. Eventually, he did win the match 3-1, but first two games were a draw. So, and this is game 2 from their match. Let us get started. So, and of course, if you have any questions or anything, I'll be very happy to answer them. All right. So they played, this is played, knight f3, Zukertort, technically, right? Knight f3 first move, but it transposed to an English, c5, c4, knight c6, d4. All right. There are many lines that white can play in this position. Of course, if they want to continue with the English, they would have to play with g3. Knight c3 is an option. You can also try to play the Botvinnik system. There's so many lines that white can choose. But in this game, Boris Gelfand went for d4. Takes, takes. So we basically have Sicilian idea. So white can try to play e4 later. Knight f6. Now in this position, d5 is another, you know, typical idea for black. For example, if you take in c6, pawn takes c6, c takes d5, c takes d5, knight c3, knight f6. Black can try to hold on to the central pawn and just play, you know, play here with the central pawn. But this is something that Kasparov has played himself with the white pieces, and okay, it's a playable line, I would say, like a possibility here. Going back, knight d4, d5. Some interesting alternative for white after this d5 is not necessarily knight takes c6, but they can also play like queen a4. This is kind of an interesting approach. The idea being that they are trying to put pressure here, so you cannot really take in c4 because knight takes. And after pawn takes, black does have some messed up pawns. We are not going to be in a rush to capture either one of them. And I think white could continue maybe bishop d2 to have ideas of bishop a5, knight c3, and these pawns eventually will fall. This e pawn will be pushed maybe, or white can either develop like this or push the e-pawn, taking c4 and have a good position. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for joining. Okay. But here after queen b6, there's also this line, and this is usually quite typical for white to play in English lines after playing d4 and the trades happen. This move often happens. The knight comes to b5 with ideas of knight c7, bishop f4, and so on. But then we can go d4 and here c5. This is a potential line that could happen. But anyways, this is a completely different, I would say it's a completely different story than what happened in the game. Nepo went for knight f6, knight c3, which is a pretty natural development for white. Knight c3 also controls the e4 square and could support an e4 pawn push for white. e6. Now, technically with black in this position, if you want to transpose to other types of Sicilians, like the dragon, you could play g6 and try to go into a Maroczy. But I think at the higher level, Maroczy is not really that popular. And for example, if you go here, black has not only played d6, but black has also taken there and then played d6. And then bishop g7, castle, and there are so many plans that black can play against the Maroczy. And I really, personally, I haven't seen it much being played at the higher level, but of course, at the lower level, this is always an option. And if you're a dragon player, you would have to learn how to play against the Maroczy, of course. But in the game, Nepo decided instead of g6 to play e6. And there are many options in this position, because after e6, what is black trying to do? He's weakening temporarily the d6 square and leaving the d7 pawn backwards technically, but he's preparing to play some d5, right? That is some idea that he's preparing to do. And white has, again, a few options. If they want to stop, they cannot really stop d5, because a move like e4 here would allow some development moves like bishop c5, and then your knight would have to go back, because here you allow queen b6 idea, putting additional pressure. So usually after bishop c5, white could retreat the knight. And then there's castle, and I think black has a pretty decent position. Yeah, e6 is a very typical Sicilian. So most people here would not play e4. It's more like other options. So because they're also thinking that black would want to play bishop b4. So a3 is another option, and then white could try to consider getting some space on the queen side, for example. But I think black can equalize kind of easily. They just go bishop e7, and then they castle. Queen a5, of course, and d5 will be a move that they want to prepare to play, obviously, because they don't want to let white have too much control over the center. But they first would castle. Castling is very important in a game. So a3 wouldn't really be that big of a deal, I would say. e3 is an option. I've seen many people trying to do this to support, to strengthen their knight in d4 in case you're considering to trade to recapture with the pawn, of course. But black can basically do the same thing, and then they can castle, and d5 will be always an option that they may want to do, but they could also stick to d6. Just for the development of this bishop, it would be important for them to do some b6, bishop b7, rook c8, and then at some point they would have to play d5, because you cannot just stay so restricted. You have to eventually attack the center. So as you can see, like, there are quite some options here for white to be played. But in the game, Gelfand chose g3, which actually I like very much. Bobby Fischer was a player who would often, choose in Sicilian. I know this is not a Sicilian, really, it's in English, because there's no e4 being played yet. But Bobby Fischer is the one who would often like this kind of, idea with g3, bishop g2. Anyways, lots of players like that move. But It's definitely a nice development. And of course, if you're going to play g3, you will try not to push the e pawn too soon, because you definitely want the bishop to be opened. And with the bishop, you cannot control both diagonals. That's something very important to keep in mind. Queen b6. This is like a very typical move for black here. Of course, you can still play bishop b4 if you want to, but the point is that we are not worried. If you're thinking to play bishop b4 just to ping the knight, that's fine. You can castle here. But if you're thinking to do it to mess up white's pawns, actually, it's not going to be so easy for black to attack them. And if you're not careful, they could play some c5. And then whenever you push d6 or b6 to develop your bishop, if you manage to do so, white will be able to trade their double pawn, and anyways, it will be very tough for you given the pressure here. And if you take, you're actually going to help them. So this kind of idea is not so great. Just remember, if you're playing this with black, you're not playing bishop b4 to necessarily take the knight, but more like pin it and then support d5. Queen b6 was played, and as I said, this is like pretty typical for these types of positions. Lots of Sicilians and English openings do end up like that. Knight b3. Knight d to b5, as I was telling you previously, is another option. And trying to take control over the e6, the d6 square. Now, d5 is not really an option for black in this position, because we get to take and you have to go bishop c5 because you cannot recapture, you're staying on a knight c7 eventually. So if you go bishop c5, e3 may need to be played by white, I think, but white could also just give up the f2 pawn, because then your bishop will be stuck there. You know, like bishop g2, maybe you can take, and then king f1, and then you'll have to go back, and white should be able to hide with their king eventually. Black's king is in the center too. This is a little bit complicated. I'm not going to go that much into it. It requires quite some analysis. But knight d5, I believe, is something that makes a little bit more sense. And now white can go bishop g2. And say you go a6 to chase the knight away first. And here, tricky idea, queen e4. And if you go rook b8, we can go back. There are a lot of lines here that, and a lot of games that are played. If someone is interested in playing this, you definitely need to spend a little bit of time researching it. But this is certainly an option for white. Knight b3 was, however, played in the game by Gelfand. A very typical type of retreat move, also controlling the c5 square, which is nice because then, you know, black will not be able to put pressure on f2. Still knight e5, because as you're choosing to play g3, bishop g2, that pawn remains weak. So black is trying to take control over it and is trying to make you move this knight once again, but obviously nobody's going to go knight e2, right? So here, white supposedly has to make this move that's, I don't want to say anti-positional, but in a way it is anti-positional, because you cannot usually push both the G and E pawns in the English. At least in my opinion, you cannot do that in general. But he kind of has to, because he doesn't have another way to defend. And e4 is the move with which he does that, because he's opening up the bishop to protect, and now he's taking control over the center. He's also controlling the d5 square, because black, you know, with the queen here in b6, it's not going to be easy for black to develop. And you will see, he had a really tough position. He was able to escape this. And, you know, sometimes you need a little bit of luck. You cannot just be a strong player and play well. Like, we all make mistakes at some point, and you need a little bit of luck. And I think he's had plenty of luck in this game. Bishop b4. And now queen e2. c5 is an alternative for white. Definitely requires some thought, but and after queen c6 you probably have to play f3. Bishop g2 is an option too, but it gets a little bit messy. So f3 and then b6, bishop f4, and the complicated position. But in the game, Gelfand chose queen e2, which I like a little bit because the queen does require development. You're still controlling every single square, not leaving anything behind. You're defending your 2 pawns. And then he's just proceeding with the development. Now d5 is also not an option because something else that the queen does there is staying on the same file as the king. So this push is going to be very difficult. Not only the king is there, but also this knight in e5. So if you would ever play d5, I'll take, and this knight would be hanging. Kind of obvious, but I thought I'd explain it just in case. Bishop d2. Longer time ago, it seems like f4 was more of a popular move, but these days, bishop d2 is more of an option. And here, Nepo made a mistake. Some different people have analyzed this game and have suggested that bishop d7 was a mistake. Castle would have been a nice alternative because you definitely need to proceed with your development. And after long castle, which seems to be, the way most players proceed in this line, a5. And now we have opposite side castling. So white is going to try to attack black on the king side. White is getting ready. White will have to be ready also for black's attack on the queen side, with the king being a little bit weak, and the knight here, which will help a5, a4 coming into a tempo. It gets to be a really complex and complicated position, because after f4 there's a4 and really lots of analysis, I can tell you. So like for example here, and then takes, and good move for white in these types of positions. Keep in mind, you do not want to open up files. You try to keep the positions closed as possible, and you need to make sure there are no sacrifices that would lead to your king being weak. But if you don't see anything like that, try to pass by with your pawns, keep the position closed so that the opponent doesn't have the opportunity to take control and over open files and attack your king. You always want to keep it as close as possible. But anyways, this would be a completely different game, so many different lines, but bishop d7 is actually what was played in the game. And as I said, many grandmasters did suggest that was a mistake. a5 can also be played first, and could transpose after a long castle if black castles. But black would also try a4 and knight a1 in that case, because we don't have the opportunity to attack the knight. Black would actually open up the position, and then castle, and then knight c2, and again, like some complicated position would arise. But in the game, oopsie, bishop d7 was played. And from here on, Gelfand really gets to take over the position and get really good position that could have had very annoying consequences for Nepo. f4. That was a type of move that you would expect white to play anyways, because this knight is definitely a target being there in the center, and it has to just go back. If you go back to c6, there's e5 here, just opening up the position. So he went to g6, keeping the king supposedly safe, but anyways, e5 was played. Now, the white bishop d7 was a mistake. For those of you who play the Sicilian, you have to remember this. I'm personally not a Sicilian player, so I know this from when I played a little bit the Sicilian and what I've seen. The d7 square usually needs to be free so that this knight could retreat there. In a lot of situations, especially if there are options for white to push g4, g5, or e5. Usually this knight goes, this is a path that it takes. It's a very typical. Knight d7, knight d7, knight c5. This is a typical path that black takes with the knight in many Sicilians. Okay, sometimes you can go in d5, but it's more rare. You don't really see that often. Sometimes you go to h5, but really, like most of the time, that is the path. And if you don't have that path freed, then it's a problem. You're having a problem, and this is basically what black has in this position. He has a small problem here with the knight. Pawn takes, it's kind of necessary. An idea like bishop c6 would be something you could consider, because you're supposedly moving the bishop out with tempo and then freeing that square for your knight to go next. But unfortunately, this doesn't seem to work, because white can just take the knight, you take the rook, then they take here, you have to go rook g8. So far so good, everything is pretty forcing, and now white can castle. And the point is that if you take, for example, in g7 and say, you know what, I have plenty of material, what are you talking about? Well, your king is not really so safe here in the center, and white can make a lot of moves with tempo that will annoy very much your king in the center, like for example bishop e3, knight b5, and maybe bishop h3 as well. And white has plenty of compensation for this exchange that they're giving up. So that is not necessarily something you can do. So Ian decided to take there. You have to take back and then go back knight g8. Once again, if he's going bishop c6, something annoying would happen, but not capture, but c5 here. The queen has to go back and now take. So that move was important too, because it was forcing the queen to go back. And now if you choose to take there, now there's this check, very annoying check bishop. Queen takes b4, and white will have 2 pieces for the rook, plus some more pawns are hanging. The king is not safe. This wouldn't be a very pleasant position to play. In case knight takes e5, that could be an option too. You can think, oh, I'm just gonna sacrifice and have some ideas here to win the rook. There's still the c5, very annoying move, and the point is you don't really have a good placement for the queen. If you go back here, white can just move the rook, because you don't have control over the square anymore, and well, we've got an extra piece. So if you capture, thinking that if they take, then you get to take the rook, and you're doing at least decent. You have 2 pawns and a rook for 2 pieces, but maybe that's not necessarily something to be super worried about, because I think bishop b5 is also an option. But even this, I mean, even this could be fine, I gotta tell you, because then bishop e3 and or bishop b5 and long castle, and white will be having a very good position. So here I'm back. And now if you sit and you look at this position, you realize that, okay, the opening stage is getting close to being over. We are on move 14, and it's not very pleasant for black. Yes, definitely, both kings are in the center, but for white is 1 move away from castling. They can castle alongside whenever they feel like it, but for black, it's not that easy to come up with something, So c5, very nice idea. Queen had to go back. The point is, I think it's pretty clear that bishop takes doesn't quite help black, because white can simply take and then go knight e4 followed by knight d6, and this is often what happens when you lose your dark square bishop in a Sicilian style position after you pushed e6 and you have a hole in d6. This is always an idea that can happen, and is certainly in white's favor. So after c5, Ian went back. He probably thought, okay, I can survive this, but no, the king is in the center. And look at how nicely Gelfand is taking control of this knight here. I could have put the position from white's perspective. I don't know why I choose to show it from black's perspective. I guess because we are trying to kind of show how Ian survived and got to, win this match and then later on win the rest of his matches and qualify for the candidates. So knight e4. And sometimes when your luck is on your side, it's on your side, and you get to do really well and get to the result that you want or you need. So bishop takes d2 is more or less forcing now. a5 wouldn't work. They would just take here, knight d6, and this king would not survive. So now he probably realized that grabbing this pawn would not really help him. For example, after queen takes, maybe knight c4, bishop h3, knight d6, or this one, they could see maybe this one, and then the other one could also go to g5. White has a very, very nice attack. The extra pawn is not even visible, and black's king is in the center, so it's not really a very safe position. But he could have tried, but he decided to focus on development, and this was definitely a good choice. Knight d6 check, and now he chose to move the king. Now you have two options. You can keep the king in e7 or in f8. He did go to f8. I feel like e7 would have made a little bit more sense, but it's still not so easy because the idea would be, you know, you're trying to get this bishop here, get the rook out, and bring in the king, king f8, king g8, and maybe hide like that. But he decided to go king c8, and now white played b4. Defending his c5 pawn, of course. It is lagging. I'm not sure if it is lagging. Maybe it is lagging. I apologize if that is the case. I'm hoping not. There isn't too much lag. Okay, so maybe there could be something. My internet seems to be working well. So now you play bishop c6. And now bishop g2. He is giving up the e5 pawn. And it was really, really interesting. It was really, really interesting, Gelfand's choice to give up the e5 pawn. You could try with white rook g1, but I think he just wanted to make things a little bit faster. He wanted to finish his development, and this is what I like from this game, the way white plays to try to take control over, not take control, but just like make things faster. Sometimes you have to give up material in order to make things, you know, go a little bit faster. Tempo, making moves with tempo. Takes. And now Jan took the pawn. What to do? I mean, it's not so easy for black to get a safety place for this king. If you play a move like knight f5, I think white can even castle here and just, you know, just keep putting pressure on the file, because you cannot support your knight there. It's going to be chased away very fast, and there's not so much that you can do about it. So I think grabbing in e5 was definitely like one of the best choices he could do, but white still castled. And I like this very much because, as I said, he's putting a lot of pressure on black's king, and it's not so easy for them to escape. f6 is very hard to make. I think the engine was suggesting f6 in this position, but for a human to play f6 here, it just doesn't feel right, because you want the king, you want it gone, and you want the rook to come in. You don't really want to play f6. It's just feels like there could be some knight coming to e4, potential sacrifices. Not really something that you would consider doing. So knight f5, and now bringing another piece to the attack. This knight was not staying so well. This rook will have to be brought into play as well, but this knight being brought is good because in case, you know, a trade would happen, the other knight could come into play. Grabbing here was a choice as well. He could try to get his pawn back and then continue the attack, but I think it could give black some opportunities of g6, king g7, and trying to consolidate a tiny little bit the position. And so I think he wanted to avoid that, so he went knight e4. Now in this position, Jan decided to try to get some counterplay, since he wasn't sure probably how to bring his king to safety. And now, you know, after knight e4, grabbing in f5 starts becoming an annoying idea. He thought he would try to move the play on the other side of the board. And this is like a typical idea you're taught that someone could do. Moving, you know, from the play from your king to the other side of the board. So he went a5. Knight takes f5. Pawn takes f5. And here, knight to d6. This was knight e3. What? Ah, you're saying, no, this move unfortunately would not work for black, but thanks for pointing it out indeed. This move would not work because there's queen b2, very strong move that attacks the knight. And then if you get to take the rook, this will recapture. This knight is being attacked. And you don't quite have a good placement for it, because wherever you move it, there'll be knight g5. Or rook takes f7, simply rook takes f7. And you kind of have to sacrifice, and then knight here, and some of these pawns will start falling, and black's rooks are not coordinated. The queen and the knight will be much stronger than black's rooks. They're not coordinated, and white will have an amazing position. So knight e3 is nice, but unfortunately this idea does not work. Thanks for pointing that out so that I could explain. Queen b2 is also a nice idea that could be played. The endgame is not good for black, only if he would have managed to get the rooks activated, but because of the check, the king would have to go on the back rank, and it would be a much better position for the queen. The rooks don't get to be activated. So here he went for a5. Knight takes f5. As I said, this queen b2 is a really nice idea as well. And then some knight g5, maybe some g4, depends what you're doing here. This could have been nice for white, but knight takes f5 was Gelfand's choice, which keeps him in a very strong position. He does not recapture here, because now there's g6, and it's a similar idea as I said previously. The king can hide, and black may be able to escape this attack. But knight d6, g6 of course, and the point is that even if we give up a pawn here, now after g6 the diagonal will be weak. This square still remains weak, and black has to make black will have to stay to somehow find some way to save himself. This is a very strong move. You kind of have to play f6. There's no easy way to defend. If you play here, for example, there's b5, and the knight doesn't have a good square to go. Like if you go here, I think you end up losing something on the, maybe not exactly, but we can certainly bring in the rook, queen here, and try to mate. There's no easy defense for black, given the uncoordinated pieces. So that's the reason why after queen d5, he played rook b8. Sorry, he played f6 first, I'm sorry. f6 first, and after b5, he played rook b8. White is trying to get ready to eventually push c6 and create their passed pawn. Black doesn't seem to be having fun. Black is having a very tough position. His king didn't reach safety yet, and there could always be some sacrifices in f5. White's moves are all coming in with tempo. He played rook b8 here, but for example, if you're thinking, why didn't he go there? Well, he would lose this pawn. And this would be kind of annoying once that pawn gets to be pushed. That pawn is weak. The d file will probably be taken by white. It's not so easy. It's not so easy. So b5, rook b8. And rook a to e1 would have been probably more like a natural way of white to bring in a new piece to the attack, and then having this sacrifice here is very difficult to meet by black's pieces. There's no way to stop that sacrifice from happening. So rook takes e5, pawn takes, queen takes e5. There's some annoying checks. There's g4 coming in, another rook coming in. We're sacrificing the exchange temporary, but really black does not get to bring this king to safety. It would have been really, really tough. Instead, Gelfand played b6, which gives black some opportunity of defense. Queen to d7, correct. Correct approach. Queen e7 would lead to rook e1, and followed by g4. And white is trying to take advantage of these two pieces being completely pinned and potential sacrifices. And again, as I said, you have to stay kind of passive. Now, this is weak. The rook has to stay. There's no way for this other rook to come in out. It's really tough. But he played queen d7. And now, with black, you need to come up with some way again, as I said, for a king to go to safety. If you do go there, it's not going to be safe, because after the exchange sacrifice, you cannot go there. There will be rook f4, rook h4, and it's something that you cannot stop. If you go to g8, you're going to be stuck. Maybe even knight takes f5 could work here, because that rook is hanging. So you cannot really stay too safe in this position. But Nepo came up with this interesting idea of hiding with the king to h6. So he started with h4 yet, but also he has an idea of getting this rook into play like this. And maybe some h4 at some point too, why not? White in this position must act immediately, must come up with some way to improve. Otherwise, really, if they don't act immediately, black will bring the rook to e7, protect the knight, get the king to g7, and he will be totally fine. He has to escape from this difficult situation. But white went for it, and I love it. I love this move. I think it's really nice. Rook takes e5. You know what? I'm sacrificing. I'm going all in. Like, if you guys don't know Boris Gelfand, you should definitely check out his games. He also has 3 books that were published, really, really nice books. I only had the chance to look through the first one. I definitely need to check the other 2. Definitely a great player. And you know how they say that as you get to be older, you're not going to be playing that much dynamic chess, not sacrificing nothing. Who says that? That's a lie, guys. That's a lie. You know what? Don't ever let anyone tell you can't do something because you are different age, or you are, I don't know, higher in age, or you are, I don't know, you have something that, no, nothing. There's nothing that you cannot do. Whatever it is, you can do it. Okay? Just keep that in mind. How did white not win? We're going to figure out. We're going to figure out what happened. So he can play tactical chess. Why not? This is gorgeous. Pawn takes, queen takes. And here king g8 only move, really. Because if you go rook h7, there is another sacrifice coming in, right? Maybe this is not a real sacrifice, because now he had a positional book, exactly, but guess what? Just because he's writing positional books doesn't mean he cannot play attacking chess, right? So anyways, this would have been a killer. So that's why in this position, black's only move, after which he doesn't lose, is king g8, because you need to escape from those. It's really not safe. And now it's going to be tough for white. I think they might have gone into time trouble here. Do not remember the circumstances of this game, but Gelfand went for this interesting move, knight to e4. Queen f6 would have been an alternative that makes a lot of sense to try to put pressure on g6. But now king h7, because obviously you cannot protect, like think that, oh, I'm going to trade the queens and I'm going to be really fine. No, you're not going to be really fine, because after this, and if you're trying to sacrifice, you're not getting much. If queen takes, queen g6, and I can, you know, cover all the checks with the queen. And if you, but the rook takes, and then it's kind of game over, because, you know, that is impossible to stop, or rook s7 is going to be made. So queen g7 would not work here. So king h7. And now there's this interesting idea, because sacrificing here does not seem to help white very much. You don't want to trade queens, and if you grab, like if you take here, something like this could happen. I think you have perpetual check, or queen d1, queen g4 or something. But also, after knight takes f5, since there's no real threat, black can also go rook f8, and you might end up losing like big time. So that's why this would not be a good choice for white. But they have this other idea, trying to combine the attack on the king side with this other side of the board and try to open up a new front. That's a typical, you know, attacking idea. So c6, you take back, and then maybe he can try to play this. And you can ask me, well, why don't you just play there immediately? Well, because we can play rook e8, just sacrificing the exchange back, and probably black can hold on to this position. But why can't he do the same thing here? You're asking. He can. Rook e8. Takes. But the point is that you're trying to play into this endgame where you have a queen endgame with that b pawn passed, and you can try to find a way to avoid checks by black and try to support your b pawn. It may not be easy, but this is something you can try to do. And I think it probably would have given Gelfand a little bit more chances. Instead, he went for knight e4, rook f8, knight f6 check, forcing the rook, the exchange sacrifice back, queen takes, and now king h7. This position, no, it's not really objectively a draw. White is much better throughout the entire game. But yeah, he did make a few inaccuracies. As you let's keep going. King h7, and now rook e1. Again, this idea would have been really interesting, because you have to take with the pawn. Obviously, queen takes leads to takes, and not b7. Sorry, king f2. And this is really tough. You have to go there. Oops, sorry. Here. But black has some weaknesses that, for example, if you bring in the king, and you cannot really stop. No, white's pawns are more advanced. Specifically, this b pawn is a passed pawn, and it's not so easy to stop. So this would have been a nice idea, but you can take with the pawn, still rook e1, and kind of transpose to the other line that we saw previously. Try to trade the rooks and get into this queen endgame, but white should still be better because their pawn is way more advanced than black's pawn. But he played rook e1 directly. He didn't play the c6. And what's the difference? Yeah, the b pawn is really, really strong. The difference is that here, in this position after rook takes, they agreed on a draw because they probably thought after queen takes, queen c3, it's not going to be easy for white to kind of have a way to improve, because there's always queen here controlling c6. If you play c6, I think we even have check and maybe perpetual, depending on where you move the king. So, and this is where they agreed on a draw after rook e8, rook takes e8. The players agreed on a draw. But think about how difficult this must have been for Jan, going back to see exactly like what happened in the game, right? Because when you see the game the first time, you may not realize how strong of an attack white had. But think about how hard it must have been to play with that king in the center all that time, right? Must have been really tough because you always had to look for ways not to allow sacrifices, how to get your rooks out of it. It was really a tough game. I don't know if I could play such a game. So let's go back again to see the position from somewhere around here, right? What happened exactly in the game? And where could white have gone that wrong? There were certainly some sacrifices that I suggested, but let's see again. So look at that. So he gave up that pawn. Check. So Gelfand kept Nepo's king in the center, right? That was a big thing that they did. Then b4, bishop c6, right? And here, instead of trying to keep the material balanced, like going rook g1, he decided to give up a pawn. And this is a really nice positional pawn sacrifice that Gelfand did. This is really nice, right? So he went bishop g2, allowing the trades of the bishops, giving up that pawn, and then keeping black's king in the center for a really long time, and those files got open. So it worked out really well. He castled, he played knight e4, and then Nepo went for this a5 line, if you guys remember. Trading there was a good idea as well, and he played knight here. He did not rush because he probably thought, again, as we discussed, either a takes b4 or just g6 directly. And maybe, or just a takes b4 first, chasing them back, playing king g7 and covering themselves. And I think around here after b5 or before b5, white could have had this option of bringing more pieces. I think he might have rushed a little bit there, but b4 does make a lot of sense and it seems nice. But this is an option too, to try to sacrifice a little bit earlier than in the game. He might have thought this could not work, but he also has this way of opening up the position. But anyways, I think the biggest chance that white missed was over here. After the sacrifice, knight e4, like really nice move. Although a queen f6, right? You guys remember that queen f6 line? I think that could have given white some nice position. If you guys remember our discussions here. So knight e4, and that c3 move, c6 move could have changed a little bit the game. He had to take with the pawn, if you guys remember, and then rook e1. It is very difficult. It is very difficult to defend here. Like this. It would have been, in my opinion, very difficult to defend. But he did a really good job with the defense. I mean, we gotta give him that. And with white, with the engine, if you have the engine on and you're looking at this and that and the other one, yeah, you have great ways of saving yourself. But you know, over the board, it must have been really hard. I mean, imagine how long black stayed with his king in the center, and he only had moved around 30. He was able, 33 actually, he was able to bring the king to h7 and get the rook into play. Just took a little bit long. So that was that queen f6 move idea. Over here he had it, queen f6 first. A little bit later, that c6 push, and even a little bit earlier, maybe when he played, instead of this b6. This was another, like, this was that other moment where he probably rushed. Pushing b5 was helpful because it didn't really help black. It didn't let black, you know, trade some pawns, create some ideas for themselves. So this was nice. But that b6, in king and pawn endgames, that move is super strong because then you have the c6 pawn push and you're creating your passed pawn. It goes really, really well. But here, b6, it didn't turn out so good because it wasn't a king opponent game. They didn't really reach a king opponent game, and that c6 move would not really lead to a complete win or something like that, you know. So this, after b5, b6 was definitely, so bringing in the rook to the attack would have helped him much more here. I think this was the moment where he could have had potentially some very annoying ideas, and you have to find h5 or b6, and it's not so easy, really. But this is how Jan got lucky in a way. Got his draw, and then he ended up winning the rapids or blitz, whatever it was. I think it was rapid, and qualified. So pretty nice. I hope you guys enjoyed this game. That is all I had for this this video. Do you guys have any questions? I would be happy to answer any questions for the next few minutes if you guys have any questions about the game, about Nepo. Looks like nobody has questions. I do appreciate you guys joining in. I really hope once again that you enjoyed this video in the game. I will be making a short break, taking a short break, and coming back up with another live stream on my favorite games of the week. I actually have one game of the week. We'll see if you guys like it. A5 was not the correct move for black when he played A5. No, not really, not the best. I think instead of that, he probably should have gone this was not working, I think, because here and then there's an issue, like the knight would get attacked, and if you play f6, there would be rook e1. f6 maybe was an interesting choice. It's not like it wasn't good. It was a nice. Oh, here you're right. Actually, good that you brought it up. This was another moment where white could have had his really awesome idea here. If you remember, I did mention that. I almost forgot of reminding it. This would have been a really nice idea where Gelfand could have actually had big chances to win in this moment. Queen to b2. Instead, he traded the knight. He probably thought he will have sufficient pressure. But actually he did not have. So this would have been the right moment for him to really go for it and have his chance of beating Nepo. A6, well, I don't know. A5 was probably the best practical continuation, and he's done it. I think he has some good sense of that. I think he's an aggressive player. It's certainly going to be interesting. I cannot tell that much, really. We'll have to wait and see. December is not that far away. We'll have to wait and see. And I think they might be playing more online stuff, so it will be interesting to see what comes of it. All right, well, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for another one, live stream in about 5 minutes. See you guys very soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.